You feel the hands first, rough, calloused, belonging to men whose faces you've seen at the market, men who've bought olive oil from your husband's stall. They grip your arms, your shoulders, pulling you from your home, while neighbors emerge from doorways, their eyes already judging. Your children are crying somewhere behind you, but you cannot turn back. The street stones are hot beneath your bare feet as they drag you toward the agora. You know where this ends. Everyone knows. The post stands in the center of the marketplace, wood worn smooth by the bodies of women who came before you. The sun is merciless overhead. Your husband's voice rises above the crowd, not in your defense, but in accusation, each word a stone thrown at your back. They begin to strip away your clothing. You close your eyes, but you cannot close your ears to the gathering crowd, cannot unfeel the exposure, the terrible nakedness that is somehow worse than any blade. If you're watching this, leave a comment with your city or country. It's incredible to me that these stories, buried for millennia under marble and silence, now travel across oceans and reach every corner of the globe. This is Athens, the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and theater. The year could be 420 BC or 380, any decade within the classical period when the city-state reached its intellectual zenith. While Socrates walked these same streets, asking questions about virtue, while Euripides staged tragedies exploring human suffering. While the Parthenon gleamed white on the Acropolis above, another kind of performance was taking place in the agora below. These were not the punishments recorded in the grand histories of Herodotus or Thucydides. Those chronicles documented wars, treaties, and the deeds of great men. What happened to women? The systematic humiliations designed to enforce social order and break individual spirits was considered too mundane to memorialize. Yet fragments survive. Legal speeches by orators like Demosthenes and Lysias, comic plays by Aristophanes that mocked real practices, philosophical dialogues by Plato that referenced punishment customs in passing, and archaeological evidence from the agora itself. The post holes, the restraining rings embedded in stone, together these sources reveal a society that celebrated reason and beauty, while simultaneously perfecting rituals of degradation so calculated, so psychologically precise, that their effects rippled across generations. The paradox demands examination. How could the same culture that gave us the concept of kalikotothea, the beautiful and good, also devise punishments designed not to correct behavior, but to annihilate identity? The answer lies in understanding what these punishments were meant to protect. Not justice, but order. Not individuals, but the collective fantasy of control. The punishment began long before the physical act. It started with the accusation, often delivered by a husband who had found or claimed to have found evidence of his wife's infidelity. In Athens, a woman's sexuality was not her own. It belonged to her Kyrios, her male guardian, whether father or husband. Adultery was not a crime against the woman, or even primarily against the marriage. It was a crime against property, against the legitimacy of heirs, against the orderly transfer of wealth and citizenship. The accused woman had no legal standing to defend herself. She could not speak in court. She could not hire an advocate. Her fate was decided entirely by men, her husband, the male relatives, who might gain or lose from her disgrace, and the community of citizens who gathered to witness her punishment. The sentence, when it came, was rarely execution. The Athenians had discovered something more effective than death. They had learned that you could destroy a person completely while leaving them alive, transforming them into a walking memorial to the consequences of transgression. The woman was taken to the agora at midday, when the marketplace thrummed with maximum activity. Merchants called out prices. Philosophers debated in the Stoa colonnades. Slaves hauled amphorae of wine and oil. Children played between the stalls. Into this scene of normalcy, the condemned woman was dragged, and normalcy transformed into theater. The practice was called apodompanismos in some legal texts, though the common people simply called it the posting. She was stripped, either completely or down to a thin undergarment that concealed nothing. The stripping itself was rich. Each piece of clothing removed represented another layer of social identity peeled away. The peplus that marked her as a respectable wife, the jewelry that showed her family's wealth, the veil that signified her modesty. Naked, she was no longer a person with a name and a household. She had become an object lesson. They bound her to the wooden post with ropes around her wrists, sometimes around her throat if they wanted her head held upright, forcing her to face the crowd. The position was deliberately designed to exhaust. She could not sit. She could not shift her weight effectively. Within an hour, her legs began to tremble. Within 2, the trembling became violent, shaking. Within 3, she would begin to collapse against the ropes, which cut into her wrists and pulled her arms into agonizing positions. But the physical suffering, severe as it was, served merely as the foundation for the true punishment. The crowd did not simply watch. They participated. This is the detail that ancient sources mention almost casually, as if the behavior was so ordinary it barely warranted description. Citizens passing through the agora would stop, recognize the spectacle, and contribute their own mockery. Some shouted insults, their creativity and degradation apparently endless. Others, threw refuse, rotten vegetables, animal dung, the contents of chamber pots. The very poor, who had nothing to throw, would spit. Children, not yet educated in empathy, found the spectacle entertaining. A grotesque puppet show where the puppet bled and wept. The woman could not respond. Bound and exhausted, she could only endure, her silence interpreted as confirmation of guilt. The Greek concept of eidous, often translated as shame or modesty, was being systematically destroyed. Eidous was the internal sense of propriety that regulated behavior, the voice that said certain acts were beneath dignity. By stripping a woman naked and displaying her publicly, Athenian justice was killing that internal voice, replacing it with external horror. She would never again feel that her body was private, that any space was truly safe. The psychological term is learned helplessness, though the Greeks had no such vocabulary. They simply understood with practical cruelty that a person broken in public would remain broken in private. But there was another dimension to these public punishments, one that reveals even darker sophistication. The exposure was not just visual, it was medical. Athenian men believed, following the physician Hippocrates and earlier medical theorists, that women's bodies were fundamentally different from men's, colder, wetter, more porous, and penetrable. A woman's womb was thought to wander through her body, causing hysteria and madness. Her flesh was considered more permeable, more vulnerable to corruption. To expose a woman's body publicly was therefore not just shameful, it was dangerous to her health in ways that male exposure was not. The sun would dry her dangerous moisture. The air would penetrate her porous flesh. She was being unmade at a physiological level, or so the theory went. This pseudoscientific justification allowed the punishment to be framed not as torture, but as correction, a realignment of a body that had strayed from natural order. The guards, who watched her ostensibly to prevent rescue attempts, also served another function. They ensured that the humiliation was total. If she urinated or defecated from fear or from the simple passage of hours, they did not release her. The filth remained, adding another layer of degradation. If she fainted, they threw water on her to revive her so the punishment could continue. If she went into heat exhaustion, trembling and confused, they noted it with satisfaction. The goal was not to kill, though some women did die at the post from heat stroke, dehydration, or heart failure. The goal was to create survivors who would embody the lesson for decades to come. The duration varied based on the severity of the perceived crime and the sadism of those administering justice. Some women were released after 3 or 4 hours, their skin blistered and raw, their voices gone from screaming or from the forced silence of absolute despair. Others remained through sunset and into the night, when the marketplace emptied and they were left alone with the darkness and the rats that emerged from the grain warehouses. A few remained for a full day and night, a punishment that almost guaranteed permanent physical damage. Blindness from sun exposure, infected wounds from the ropes, psychological fractures that would never heal. When they were finally cut down, they often could not stand. Family members, if any remained willing to claim them, would carry them away. If no one came, they were left to crawl or die. The state had no interest in their fate beyond the completion of the spectacle. But if public exposure represented the mainstream of Athenian humiliation, there existed even more intimate violations, punishments that ancient sources reference with such discomfort that the descriptions become fragmentary and euphemistic. The comic playwright Aristophanes, in his play The Clouds, makes a crude joke about an adulteress and a radish, a line that would have made his original audience laugh in recognition. The orator, Lysias, in a legal speech, refers to the customary treatment of caught adulteresses without elaboration, assuming his listeners knew exactly what he meant. Later commentators, writing in the more prudish Roman period, mention these practices with horror and fascination. The punishment involved an object, absurdly ordinary, a radish or a dried fig, vegetables available at any market stall. The accused woman, already stripped and restrained, was subjected to a violation designed to mock the very act she was accused of. The radish, hard and knobbed, or the fig, dried to woody stiffness, was inserted into her body as the crowd watched, transforming a sexual act into a grotesque parody. The symbolism was deliberate and multifaceted. She had opened her body improperly, so now it would be opened properly, according to community judgment. She had sought pleasure outside legal bounds, so now she would experience pain within those bounds. The everyday object, something people ate, now became an instrument of torture, ensuring that every subsequent glimpse of radishes or figs in the marketplace would trigger memory and trauma. The physical damage was immediate and severe. In an age without antiseptics or antibiotics, the torn tissue became infected easily. Many women developed chronic pain, scarring that made normal life agonizing. Some became infertile, which, in a society that measured women's worth primarily through childbearing, represented a kind of civil death. But again, the physical was merely the foundation. The psychological architecture of the punishment was what made it effective across time. The woman had been violated with an object from the marketplace, the same marketplace where she would need to shop to exist, to continue her life if she survived. The ordinary world had been weaponized against her. Nowhere was safe. Nothing was neutral. Every fig, every radish, every vegetable stall became a trigger for relived trauma. This is the signature of sophisticated oppression. It doesn't just punish the act, it colonizes memory and perception, ensuring that the punishment never truly ends. These practices were not secret. They were not the work of rogue mobs or vigilante justice. They were sanctioned by law, administered by officials, and occurred in the civic center of Athens, the city that prided itself on logos, on reason. Plato walked past that marketplace. Aristotle taught students a few hundred meters away. The contradiction is not a flaw in the historical record. It is the historical record. Ancient Greece, like all civilizations, was not a monolith. It contained multitudes of contradictions. The same society that produced philosophy also produced systematic cruelty. The same men who debated ethics in the morning could watch a woman's public destruction in the afternoon and see no tension between the two acts. This is because the women being punished were not considered fully part of the ethical community that mattered. They were instruments of that community's reproduction, vessels for creating legitimate citizens, but not citizens themselves. To punish them was not to violate justice, it was to maintain it. The aftermath of these punishments rippled outward in ways that the surviving sources only hint at. A woman who endured the posting or the violation could not simply return to normal life. Her reputation was destroyed, which in Athens meant her social existence was destroyed. Her husband would almost certainly divorce her, which was his legal right and social obligation. Her children, especially daughters, would struggle to make good marriages, tainted by their mother's disgrace. Her natal family would often disown her to protect their own standing. She might end up in prostitution, the only role available for women without male guardians, which confirmed the very promiscuity she had been punished for in a perfect circle of social logic. Some women disappeared from the historical record entirely after their punishment, their fates unrecorded because they no longer mattered to anyone keeping records. This erasure is itself a kind of evidence. When a person stops appearing in legal documents, in family records, in any trace of civic life, we can infer that they have been expelled from the community so completely that they have become effectively dead while still breathing. There is one fragmentary inscription, discovered in the 19th century during excavations of the Athenian agora, that provides a haunting glimpse. It is a curse tablet, a thin sheet of lead inscribed with scratchy letters and rolled up tight, then deposited in a well, probably sometime in the 4th century BC. The curse tablets were how powerless people, mostly women and slaves, tried to exercise agency through magical means when legal means were denied them. This particular tablet reads, in translation, "I bind the tongue of Euphalatos, who spoke against me. I bind the hands that stripped me. I bind the eyes of all who watched. May their sleep be broken. May their food turn bitter. May they know shame." It is signed with a woman's name, though the specific name is corroded and uncertain. What is certain is that the woman who wrote this had endured public humiliation, probably the posting, and was trying through magic to balance accounts that justice would never balance. Her voice, preserved accidentally in lead and deposited in darkness, speaks across 2,400 years with undimmed rage and pain. She was powerless in life. She remains powerless in death. But she refused to be silent. The curse itself probably had no effect on her tormentors. They went about their lives, attended symposiums, voted in the assembly, grew old with honor. But the fact that she made it, that she scratched her fury into metal and consigned it to the gods of the underworld, reveals something essential: the human refusal to accept erasure. The practices eventually faded, not because Athens developed moral objections, but because Athens itself faded. The city lost its independence to Macedon, then became part of the Roman Empire, and its specific customs were diluted by other traditions. Roman law had its own sophisticated cruelties, but they operated differently. The particular genius of Athenian sexual humiliation, the use of public space and communal participation, became obsolete, but the logic never disappeared. Throughout history, societies have independently discovered that sexual humiliation is an effective tool of control, that the body can be turned into a site of punishment more lasting than any prison, that shame can be engineered and weaponized. The specific tools change. The underlying strategy remains constant. What remains today is not the practices themselves, but their shadow. When we excavate the agora, we find the post holes, the mounting rings, the physical infrastructure of humiliation embedded in the marketplace where democracy was born. When we read the comedies and orations, we hear the jokes and euphemisms that mask horror in casualness. When we examine the cursed tablets and grave inscriptions, we find the fragmentary voices of women trying to speak back against the machinery designed to silence them. The historical record is incomplete because the experiences of the punished were not considered worth recording in detail. What we have are glimpses, fragments, enough to reconstruct the outline, but not the full humanity of those who suffered. This incompleteness is itself a continuation of the punishment. They were erased from the record, as they were erased from the community. Ancient Athens is remembered for art, philosophy, and democracy. Yet these achievements rested on systematic cruelty toward women, slaves, and outsiders. Marble temples rose through slave labor, and philosophical debates happened in households run by rightless women. Democracy served only adult male citizens. To study Greece honestly is to hold beauty and brutality together. The same society that carved masterpieces also inflicted harm. These realities coexisted in the same streets and minds. The man who funded the Parthenon might punish a neighbor's wife. This isn't a contradiction to fix, but a truth to face. Civilization and cruelty often walk side by side. In the ruins of the Athenian agora today, tourists walk where women once stood bound. The post is long gone, rotted away, or burned for firewood during some forgotten crisis. The stones remain indifferent. The marketplace is quiet now, just foundations and fragments. But if you stand there at midday, when the Mediterranean sun is merciless overhead, you can feel it. The heat on skin, the exposure, the terrible nakedness that is somehow worse than any blade. History leaves ghosts not in the air, but in the body's memory, in the way vulnerability still feels like danger, in the knowledge that power has always known exactly where to cut to leave scars that never show but never heal.